Good afternoon. Let us begin with two quotes that contain the topic we will be presenting to you today. The first one says, "Grief is the price we pay for love," by Queen Elizabeth II. And this one says, "How can the dead be truly dead when they still live in the souls of those who are left behind?" by Carson McCullers. And the topic we will be presenting to you is on elegies. We are Andrea Cotogil, Andrea Mejia Chavez, Danilo Rojas Corrales, Sebastián Chacon Chavarria, and Mariana Porres. So let's begin with the definition and description of an elegy. So an elegy is a subgenre of poetry in which the poems are centered on the topics of death and loss. It is said that an elegy is referring to the mood of the poet, not the form of the poem, which means that the form is important. However, we will be focusing on the emotions of the poet who's trying to portray how he or she feels after the death of a loved one. There is a close relationship between an elegy and elegiac poem. However, our classmate Mariana will be talking about it in a few minutes. Now, there are four main periods in which we can see a transformation on elegies. And these periods are the classical, in which elegies were transmitted by singing songs about death. Then we have the canonical period in which we can place during the 1600s and the 1800s. During this period, the most important feature of an elegy was its normative sense. So, an elegy will tell you how you are expected to behave during a ceremony related to that. Then we have the modern period in which there is more a sense of uh, how melancholic it is to experience the death of someone. In this period, there is more a psychological perspective on elegies because Freud is around. So, yeah, there's a lot of psychological elements here. And then we have the contemporary period in which it is supposed that death is not a taboo anymore. So, poets have more freedom to write about death. And for example, we can see now parodies, satires, critics of how society treats the death and how we can, for example, profit from dead bodies. Or there are different movements, new movements, for example, masculine elegy. There is a case of a poet who wrote over 30 poems about his beloved first wife who died from cancer. So that's a different, let's say, wave of analogy. And whereas the classical period was related to songs, the canonical modern and contemporary are more related to reflective verses. Now, Mariana will be talking about the history behind elegies.
Now that we have a better understanding of the meaning of an elegy poem, where did elegy poems originate? If certainly there is not a concrete answer for this question, it is believed to be one of the oldest forms of poetry. In fact, Elegiac poetry traces back to the ancient Greek tradition, and the word elegy originated from the Greek word eleia, which actually means lament. And this term referred to a poetic verse that is phrased in elegiac couplets addressing topics such as death, loss, love, or even war. So we could say that Greeks were the pioneers of this type of poetry. Many decades later, the war between Romans and Greeks triggered the proliferation of Elegiac poetry. And when Romans conquered Greek lands, they also appropriated Greek artistic traditions, and Elegiac poetry was not the exception. So this tradition was adopted by Roman conquerors who later formulated their own elegies using their language, in this case Latin, and they also addressed similar topics as Greeks. However, they gave a special emphasis to erotic or mythological themes. This is the main difference between Roman elegies and Greek elegies. Then, after the fall of the Roman Empire, elegies lost popularity, but instead of becoming totally lost, they found a place as an occasional poetic form. This means that rather than dedicating oneself only to the craft of elegies, poets use it to commemorate or to mark special occasions and events. And this trend continued until the post Renaissance, when the form finally found popularity again. And it is also worth mentioning that this came at a time when there was a renewed interest in Roman culture. And finally, elegies poems were revived during the Renaissance, and eventually they made their way into the canon of English literature. And in modern English literature, the term elegy has been altered considerably. In this sense, the English literature actually expands the meaning of an elegy. So it's not only a lament for a departed beloved, but it could also be a tragic event. And I want to point out the Sector book, which is a large collection of Old English poetry from the Anglo-Saxon period, because this book contains some very famous poems such as The Wanderer, The Seafarer, and The Wife's Lament, and those poems are considered elegies, not precisely because they refer to the death of someone, but because they convey a really profound sense of grief. And now my classmate Andrea will provide more information about the common themes of elegies.
So, the themes in elegies. So, an elegy is the poetry of lamentation. It is a poem about loss or the end of an era. So, its main theme revolves around human mortality. The elegy can have themes such as mourning, loss, and reflection. However, it can have other minor themes such as redemption and consolation. So, mourning has been a significant theme in this subgenre of poetry since very ancient periods. Sorry. So, according to David Kennedy in 2007, in his book named The Elegy, in the Bible, people used to mourn their dead people for 30 days. And it also reports examples on inappropriate mourning behavior. For example, Isaiah complaining about people lingering in cemeteries, eating and drinking after the permitted period of mourning. So, any celebration of the deceased would have to stress their uniqueness in the language of moderation. So, mourning is present in how the poet reacts and feels to the death of the loved person. So, actually, grief is a natural response to loss. So, the poet writes about feeling a sharp sorrow or a painful regret. So, when analyzing the elegy, the reader can identify emotions such as exhaustion, fear, denial, anger, and guilt. So, successful mourning periods, it's a process of healing and returning to full health. The work of mourning starts from a recognition that the loved object, the loved person, no longer exists. So, now loss and grief. And they are closely related and highly difficult to separate from one another. So, in this theme, theme, sorry, of mourning, they are inseparable from concepts like appropriateness, decency, and normality. Also, the elegy throws a melancholy veil over common objects, like the dresses at a funeral procession, and gives them a kind of solemn appearance. Kennedy also states that the theme of an elegy underlines how our conception of death involves a fear that the limits of rationality might be closer and more fragile than we think. So, this subgenre allows writers to honor death and to honor their loved ones who have died.
Hello everyone, now I'm going to talk a little bit about some types of elegies. And let's begin with pastoral elegies. To begin with, this type of poem was developed firstly by the Greek Theocritus, who was born in the 3rd century before Christ. Later, pastoral elegies were also developed by the famous poet Virgil. In this kind of poem, the persona is generally a shepherd that mourns the death of a friend or a beloved person. Regarding the setting of pastoral elegies, generally it makes reference to rural or country life, and they tend to mention elements of nature that describe how rural life is. Now, a couple of examples of pastoral elegies. First of all, we have Herones by Percy Bysshe, which commemorates the death of his friend John Keats. And also we have Lycidas by John Milton, and that was dedicated to his friend Edward King. And something relevant about this poem is that it was originally written in the language English. Another type of elegy is the Latin elegy. Well, Latin elegies were basically introduced by the Romans, and Ennius, who is considered the father of Roman poetry, played an important role in its development because he introduced the Elegiac couplet into Latin. And it is important to know that the Elegiac couplet poetry structure was originally employed or developed by the Greeks. And probably the most distinctive characteristic of some of these Latin elegies regarding this structure is the fact that an elegiac couplet consists of a hexameter verse followed by a pentameter verse. Here we have other classifications for elegies. On one hand, we have personal elegies, in which the poet laments the death of a close friend or a relative. And on the other hand, we have impersonal elegies, in which the poet expresses his sorrow over human destiny or over some aspect of a contemporary life. And now my partner Sebastian will talk to you about some important details about the structure of elegies.
Okay, now let's discuss some of the structure of the elegies, right? As my classmate mentioned previously, the elegy has a poetic mode, has a lot of seniority, it has had a long history, and throughout that history, the ways in which poets have expressed their feelings about death, grief, and rebirth even don't have the same form. Now, structurally, we can identify different stages, and we will focus mainly on two, right? Originally, in the classical period, the Greek elegy, and by adoption, the Roman elegy, had a very formal, very rigid structure, but were very loose on the themes, right? Initially, it was just couplets that alternated dactylic hexameters and pentameters. So one 6-syllable line and one 5-syllable line, and so on and so forth. By the time we arrive at the 18th century, there's a big change, however, in the aesthetics, the formal aesthetics of the elegy. By that time, it was not couplets anymore, but rather quatrains, 4-line stanzas. There could be more, of course, to a single elegy. You could have 2, 3, 4, maybe even more. But the point is that each stanza was composed of 4 lines, composed exactly in iambic pentameter, and it featured an A B rhyme scheme. Now, of course, these characteristics weren't static and they started changing pretty much right away. Already in the 18th century, the graveyard school of poets had started to upset the structure of elegies to their taste because they were more focused on exploring themes and exploring feelings than with sticking to a single rigid elegiac structure. And the tendency, the trend of altering the form remained pretty much until well into our days, to the point that a contemporary elegy pretty much it resembles in nearly it doesn't resemble in nearly anything a classical elegy. Now, there's a very interesting structure, a very interesting idea relating to structure, and is that proposed by Powell in his essay about Elegiac structures. He proposes that there are three thematic structures. So he doesn't concern himself with the more formal aspect of poetry anymore, but with the themes, of course. And he sees three distinct patterns to elegies, which one of them implies a movement from grief to consolation, which means that you embrace death, but you see a happy ending, or at least the speaker in the poem comes to understand why that happens. There is, however, grief to refusal of consolation when the previous change doesn't occur, and instead the poet or the speaker just indulge in grief. And there's one final change, thematic change, which is grief to a deeper grief. This is sort of what we see, for example, Edgar Allan Poe and other Gothic poets that seem to dwell on grief until it eventually leads to their own death. Now, we want to discuss an example of elegies, of course, and it will be first a traditional elegy, in our case, a reminiscence by Anne Bronte. I will discuss half of the poem, and my partner Danilo will discuss the other half. So I will read you then. Yes, thou art gone and nevermore. Thy sunny smile shall gladden me. But I may pass the old church door, and pace the floor that covers thee, may stand upon the cold and damp stone, and think that frozen lies below. The lightest heart that I have known, the kindest I have ever known. Now, in this first half, we see very distinct elements of elegiac poetry. For example, we see a setting defined by gloom and sadness, very characteristic, for example, of Gothic poetry as well. And we can see in the manifestation of an old church in the cold damp stone, and even in comparing the others, not the speaker, but the one they are mourning, the comparison of their smile with a sun, and that means that if the person to whom the elegy is dedicated has passed away, then the sun has died. The sun that was their smile has died. According to Powell's typology, as I mentioned before, this is then a grief to consolation. The first two stanzas show a pervasive gloom and sort of a surrender to the idea that the loved one has passed, but there is a very clear acceptance of grief and of pain in the coming stanzas.
Now I'm going to continue with the last two stanzas of Reminiscence. Yet, though I cannot see thee more, 'tis still a comfort to have seen, and though thy transient life is over, 'tis sweet to think that thou hast been. To think a soul so near divine, within a form so angel fair, united to a heart like thine, has gladdened once our humble sphere. Now that we have read the whole poem, we can see that in terms of structure, it is a short poem, and in this second set of stanzas, the poem keeps the ABAB rhyme scheme, just like the ones that my partner Sebastian just read. In terms of meaning, in these stanzas, we can see how the persona keeps reviving all memories and feelings of a past life with this person that passed away. She says that she finds comfort in the fact that she knew this person, and even though now she cannot see him anymore. He lives in her memories, and she also says that it is sweet to think that once he was part of her life. And I am saying he, but the poem does not really specify the gender of the person that the poem is talking about. Um, Something interesting about this poem is that, as you can see, it expresses not only sad memories, but also happy memories of these two people. So it is not limited to great feelings. However, many times these happy feelings are what make us feel sad and miss that person that is not anymore with us. Additionally, this poem can be classified as a personal elegy because, as you can notice, the poem is talking about a person that passed away, a beloved person of the reader. So, in this sense, it is considered to be a personal elegy.
To continue, we will analyze an example of a modern elegy poem. This poem is called Stop All the Clocks, but it is also known as Funeral Blues, and it was written by W.H. Auden, and W.H. stands for Wisting Hugh, who was a very famous British poet, and he wrote this poem for a play. So the poem appeared for the first time in 1936, and this play was about a woman who lost her loved one. So the poem conveys all of the emotions the woman experienced after the loss of her loved one. We decided to use this poem particularly because of all of the vivid images it gives us in order to convey the feeling of grief of this woman. So before we continue with the analysis, I will read the poem for all of you. And the poem says, stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum bring out the coffin. Let the mourners come. Let airplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message, he's dead. Put crepe bows round the white necks of the public dopes. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my sun. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out everyone. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood. For nothing now can ever come to any good. And now my classmates will continue with an analysis of this poem.
Thank you, Mariana, for reading this very emotional poem. We will continue with the analysis, as you said. So there are certain keywords that help us understand the poet better. For example, we can see that she's asking for a continuity break. She needs a pause. She needs everything to stop, prevent, silence, put out, pack up, dismantle, pour away, or sweep up. Because she needs the world to understand that a tragic event had happened and that her life will never be the same. And she's asking for a little bit of comprehension and respect as well. Now, there is one meaningful capitalization. He is dead, which make us think of these phases of grieving in which there is one that is about negation, but then there comes the realization and acceptance that the person had died. There are symbolic colors. We have the case of white and black. She asks the white color to be hidden and the black to be worn. There is also an insight to the author's thoughts and feelings. For example, in these quotes, I thought love would last forever, forever immortality, right? But no, we're mortal beings, and she was wrong, no immortality. And then she says, for nothing now can come to any good. So this sense of nothing is going to come to a better place. And now we will be moving on with Andrea, who has something else to tell us about this poem.
Okay, so the theme of this poem is loss and mourning. So in these first stanza, Auden focuses on sounds. He makes a call to stop all the joyous melodies like pianos and drums. Um, he feels like the time has stopped and it is just a moment of grief. And he also believes that people should mourn his beloved respectfully since he even asks dogs to be silent. The poet requests people to stop what they are doing in order to join his grief. And we can see it in the following portion of the stanza. That is the one that you have on the screen. Now, in the second stanza, he highlights that all people should grieve his beloved. And this is the third one. So in here, the major theme is loss. He states that his beloved one is his soulmate and the reason that he lived. The author does not know how to keep going without him, since it feels like they spend their whole lives together in joyous and unhappy moments. And yeah, and this is the fourth stanza. In here, the main theme is grief. The poet feels lost and doesn't know what to do without his beloved. He wants to die after his loved one, since for him, life is meaningless. So, in this last line, for nothing now can ever come to any good, the reader can understand that he's hopeless and does not believe in life after love.